last week from this book, The Prabhupada Leela, when he visited Boston in 1968. And his first visit, well, he arrived in Boston, but then his first visit after that. So I just finished the part where he gave a lecture at Northeastern University, and and then the next one is, I'll start reading after that, just after that. The big noonday crowd at Northeastern in an auditorium, they listened politely. Prabhupada concluded his half-hour lecture by explaining God, the Supreme Being, as the origin of the material, external, and spiritual, internal energies. We living entities, although spiritual, have marginal position. All of us in this material world are covered by the external energy. The prayer of Hare Krishna means, "Oh, my dear Lord, I am your part and parcel eternally, but some way or other I have fallen in this ignorance of material energy. Kindly lift me up in the spiritual energy." And just had some realization a couple of months ago when I sleep at night, I play a recording of Prabhupada giving lectures. And one morning when I was waking up, before I was fully awake, I was, halfway between awake and asleep, uh, I heard Prabhupada's voice, and I had some realization that Prabhupada's voice is coming directly from Krishna Loka. It's not, and it was a powerful realization for me. Of course, I knew that, but at that time it became particularly um, uh, powerful understanding for me. And so Prabhupada describes himself as one of us. All living entities are covered by the external energy, but Prabhupada was not covered by the external energy. He is directly a resident of Vrindavan eternally as Krishna's intimate associate. And and that's true, not only for Prabhupada, but for all of us who are chanting Hare Krishna with faith and and some love. The love will increase and the faith will increase over time, and our realization of Krishna will increase over time. But any devotee who's chanting Krishna's name with faith and devotion, as you all are, is we're not in the material world the same way as those who don't have that faith or Prabhupada uses the term non-devotee. I'm definitely not the same as I was before I heard the chanting of Hare Krishna. So we're different now. And our chanting of Hare Krishna, although not so pure, is still, when we chant Hare Krishna, it's directly a transcendental sound vibration. So we should know that. It's not only the pure devotees who are chanting the pure transcendental sound. It's any devotee who chants Krishna's name with faith and devotion. So I'll keep reading. The prayer of Hare Krishna means, "Oh, my dear Lord, I am your part and parcel eternally, but some way or other I have fallen in this ignorance of material energy. Kindly lift me up to the spiritual energy." Although Prabhupada invited the audience to stay afterward and speak with his disciples, when the bell rang, the lecture abruptly ended, and most of the students immediately left the chapel to make room for the next group of students. It was the academic factory. Class was over, and Swamiji and his followers should now leave. We're all familiar with that and going to school, going to college. When the bell rings, you just get up and you go. And the next group comes in. It is an education academic factory, and just churning out one group of students after another. And yeah. So everybody, Prabhupada invited them to stay and talk, but they all got up and left. And probably some of them were curious, or somewhat interested. Most of them didn't really care. They were just coming out of a little bit of curiosity. But some of them, I'm sure, were affected by Prabhupada's talk. And of course, in the future, that was 50 years ago, or 55 years ago. I'm getting a call. Okay. So, so who knows what course their life took over the last 55 years, but they were all affected. Everyone who met Prabhupada or heard him speak was inevitably uh, affected very strongly by his presence in a way that they couldn't know, but Krishna knows. And okay, I'll keep reading. Let's see, and this is the next class that Prabhupada gave was at Boston University, which is another really big college in Boston, just a couple of miles from our temple, that some of our students go to who live here at the temple. Let's see. The Boston University engagement in spacious Marsh Chapel was poorly attended, despite thousands of students riding the trolleys and going in and out of the luncheonettes and big gray buildings. Only a half a dozen students came to the chapel to hear Swamiji speak. The devotees, they were pained and embarrassed, criticized Satsvarupa for the turnout. He was the one who organized all these speaking engagements. And the Northeastern one was well attended, but this one at BU was not well, only a half a dozen students came. So the other devotees there were criticizing Satsvarupa Maharaj for the poor turnout. Let's see. Uh, yeah, without hesitation, Prabhupada held a full program, beginning with a kirtan that lasted almost an hour. He requested Brahmananda, visiting from New York, to give an introductory speech. Then Prabhupada spoke, his voice reverberating over the sound system through the large empty chapel. After the lecture, Prabhupada called for questions. A boy standing at his seat and shouting to make himself heard, asked, "Is this Advaita philosophy?" A challenge. The devotees could tell that this student had come with his own ideas about yoga and Advaita. So young people, they were reading books like that, talking about almost all impersonal books, of course. So they were familiar with terms like Advaita and Dvaita and different terms they were familiar with, and a tiny bit of philosophy. So this boy asked, "Is this Advaita philosophy?" He's like, showing off, like, I know some of the words and some of the Sanskrit words, and you're a Swami, so you should recognize that I'm also an intelligent person who knows something about this. Of course, he didn't know anything, but everyone is puffed up and thinks they're very intelligent. And mostly they may have some intelligence, but they don't know anything about Advaita, or anything Vedic philosophy. So the boy said, "Is this Advaita philosophy?" And Prabhupada asked, "Do you know what Advaita philosophy is?" "All is one," the boy replied. "Just as the rivers enter the ocean, so we all enter into the ultimate oneness." Srila Prabhupada replied that although the river goes to the ocean, its place in the ocean is not permanent. Again, that water evaporates into the sky, forms clouds, and falls back onto the land. To argue that spiritually everything becomes one as the rivers go to the ocean, then the boy would have to accept the actual conclusion the water again falls back onto the land. Similarly, those spirit souls who try to merge into the absolute must again fall back into the material world. Prabhupada thoroughly defeated the impersonal notion of oneness. The boy sat down silent. There were no other questions. And there's just a couple other points on that I heard Prabhupada refer to recently to defeat that argument of the merging idea of the soul with the one. He said, he gave the example of a green bird that flies into a green tree full of green leaves. So you can't see the green bird anymore as distinct from the tree. But that doesn't mean that the bird has lost its individual identity just because you can't distinguish it. Or he gave the example of an airplane that flies up into the sky. So it may be a very clear day where you can see everything, but after a minute, the plane is so high in the sky that it appears to have merged, appears to have disappeared into the sky. So, but the plane hasn't ceased to exist as its own individual identity just because you can't distinguish it from the sky anymore. So those are a couple of examples that Prabhupada used. These examples against the impersonal philosophy are important for us because Prabhupada expected us to be able to argue against the impersonal idea of oneness because it is so prevalent in this day and age, and so many people are misled by that philosophy that they think that that's the goal of spiritual realization, the goal of Vedanta. They equate Vedanta with merging into the one absolute. But that's not Krishna's idea. Krishna said, "Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be as individuals." Okay, so I'll keep reading. Uh, Talking with his disciples afterward, Prabhupada said sarcastically, "People today do not even know how to ask a good question. These impersonalists always ask the same hackneyed question about the river going into the ocean." On the way back to the temple, some of the devotees continued to complain about Swamiji's having to go to an engagement with such a poor turnout. Brahmananda warned Satsvarupa that the next engagement had better not be like this one. Brahmananda, of course, him and Satsvarupa, brahmachari at this time, they're both brahmachari, and they had come in the beginning at 26 Second Avenue at almost the exact same time. And so they knew each other very well. And Brahmananda, of course, had taken a very early leadership role in ISKCON because he was so big and powerful physically, and just a very powerful personality in general. So he was telling Satsvarupa, he said, the next engagement better not be like this one. And anyway, they were friends, but of course they were both trying to do their best for Swamiji. And at this particular time, it hadn't worked out so well. Okay, and the next engagement was at MIT. And of course, MIT is a very prestigious university here. Prabhupada was well aware of the worldwide prestige of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge. That's where Mother Devahuti and Mukundalila Prabhu go to preach a lot when they're here in Boston. And it's a very nice group they have there. A lot of sincere young men are becoming devotees from that. Many Indians went there to study. It was, in fact, an Indian organization that invited Prabhupada to speak. When Prabhupada arrived in the evening, he found over 100 people waiting in the student lounge where he was to lecture. Uh, Although it was time for the lecture to begin, the devotees had still not arrived with the paraphernalia. There was no flower garland for Prabhupada, no painting of Krishna, and no sign with the Mahamantra. The audience waited. And Satsvarup Maharaj asked Prabhupada, said, "Should we begin? What should we do?" He was in anxiety, as you can imagine, because it wasn't going smoothly in the beginning. But Prabhupada just said, "It doesn't matter, and we'll just start without all the paraphernalia." And then Prabhupada said the musical instruments had not come either, the kartals or mridanga or harmonium. So Prabhupada sat clapping his hands in time. They played the Hare Krishna record album that it's called the Happening album. And it was, I think, the first record album that came out, 33 and a third vinyl album as everything was at that time. And that's the same record that George Harrison got in before him a year like in 1968, and he was listening to it for a couple of years, and then when he met the first devotees to go to London, he was glad to meet them because he had been listening to that record album and he really liked it for a couple of years already. Anyway, Prabhupada had them play the album on the record player, the turntable, and he sat clapping his hands in time and listening. And then afterwards, Prabhupada spoke boldly, challenging the very concepts underlying MIT. Where in this big university, he asked, is a department for studying the technology of the soul, for understanding that principle which distinguishes a living body from a dead body? That principle which, when present in the body, gives life, and when absent, brings death. Where is the science to study this all-important principle of life? You have MIT, big, famous university all over the world, so many intelligent scientists and technologists work there and lecture there and go to school to learn there. Big, famous institution, but there's no department. Or what's the difference between a living body and a dead body? It's like the most important question there is. It's a very scientific question. And of course they have their scientists that study and say, well, in the future with our chemistry and biology and laboratory experiments, we'll find the source of life. But Prabhupada ridiculed that idea. You'll never find the source of life or the meaning of life in that way. You'll never find the difference between a living body and a dead body. So he ridiculed that idea, and he challenged them. You have this big, huge, famous school, but nobody knows where life comes from. So could say that's a pretty crucial, the most crucial question, the most important question. Where is the science to find this all-important principle of life? Although scientists consider life to be merely chemicals or electrical impulses, he argued, still they are unable to assemble the chemicals and produce life. Why? There is no department in this university for answering this question, and therefore people are in ignorance. They don't know the self or the next life or the purpose of human life beyond animal activities. This science, however, is taught in the Bhagavad Gita. After the lecture, there were many questions. This first one is just a silly question. Another student asked, why do you wear that marking on your forehead? The tilak. And Prabhupada said, why do you wear that necktie around your neck? Prabhupada snapped back, annoyed with the question. The student sat down looking at his necktie, and Prabhupada explained to him that questions about why people dress a certain way are trivial, especially considering the gravity of the present subject matter. Sometimes, oftentimes, if we're giving a lecture at a university or something, and people will generally ask, why do you wear the tilak? What's that marking? Or why do you shave your head? Or why do you wear a dhoti or sari? So we generally answer in just answer it. And you can jump off of that to go into all kinds of more important topics. But generally we don't answer that question with that in that way that Prabhupada did at that time. Just annoyed with the question and say, we don't say, oh, that's just a trivial question. Try to ask something a little more significant. But Prabhupada was very, he's Prabhupada, and he spoke in a way that most of us can't speak in. We have to take a much more like humble approach, and but we can get the same points across that it is actually a trivial question, but we can use it as a springboard to other topics. Uh, when the question and answer period ended, Satsvarupa stood and briefly addressed the students, inviting them to attend other college lectures by Prabhupada or to come hear him at the temple. Wherever a saintly person goes, Satsvarupa said, becomes a tirtha or a holy place. And now for the month of May, Boston is a tirtha, so please take advantage of it. As Srila Prabhupada was leaving with his disciples, a group of Indian faculty members and students came and stood around him, speaking rapidly, challenging him. One student, espousing the philosophy of monism, asserted that the highest expression of the absolute truth was that all is one. Prabhupada tried to make him understand that simply oneness was a rudimentary idea because from that one come so many variegated manifestations but the man would not accept defeat. And Prabhupada became excited, arguing with him. Taking the man by the shirt collar, Prabhupada shouted, "You say everything is one, but is this cotton shirt the same as a cotton ball? Why don't you wear a cotton ball instead of this shirt?" So you can imagine the man's surprise when Prabhupada, he wasn't gentle about it. Prabhupada reached out and grabbed his shirt, and he wasn't rough, but he wasn't doing it in a very gentle way. And he shouted at the man, "You say everything is one? Why don't you wear a cotton ball instead of this cotton shirt? Everything is not one." And one challenge that Prabhupada advised his disciples that they could use if somebody said all is one. He said, you can tell them, well, if all is one, then your money is my money. I might as well have your money, so give me your wallet right now. It's all is one. What difference does it make if it's in your pocket or my pocket? So, but that's a Prabhupada, the philosophy is there, and the philosophy can become quite uh, complex, and it's very intellectual, but you can express it, and Prabhupada did express it in this case in a very practical, down-to-earth way that makes it clear that all is not one. The Indian technologists surrounding Prabhupada, raising their voices and arguing, while Prabhupada's disciples looked on anxiously. Govinda Dasi warned the devotees about Swamiji's health, and Brahmananda and the others smoldered. That means they were really mad, but they couldn't express it in an outward way at the people, but they were smoldering like a fire at the offensive Indians. This wasn't the way to speak with a sadhu. They were thinking, and they were right. Meanwhile, a devotee reported that Prabhupada's car had broken down and someone ran out into the street to get a taxi. The arguing continued. When a taxi finally arrived, a few disciples pushed through the arguers, insisting, Swamiji, please, your taxi is waiting. It can't wait any longer. You have to go. And they disengaged their spiritual master from the mass of arguing technologists. Prabhupada considered the evening a success. Prabhupada was not against getting into an argument with people, and Prabhupada was ready to do anything to preach Krishna consciousness. He would just present straight Krishna conscious philosophy. He always presented straight Krishna conscious philosophy. And if someone was humble and submissive, then Prabhupada would speak very gently and reassuringly and just very answering all their questions. But if somebody wanted to fight, Prabhupada was ready to fight. And there's not verbally, but there's an example of, you may have heard the story of, there was a big pandal in, I forget what city, in Mumbai or Delhi, I forget. And there's a big stage, and Prabhupada was on the stage, and there was a lot of his disciples on the stage, and they were having a big kirtan, very enthusiastic, attractive kirtan. And the people, and there was like 20,000 people in the audience or something like that. A lot of people there. And some of the one or two of the men in the front row beside the stage were reaching up onto the stage and grabbing at the ankles of a couple of the women disciples of Prabhupada. And Prabhupada, he didn't like that at all. And he had some kartals in his hand, and he took one of the kartals and was swinging the other kartal around him over his head. He was ready to attack that the man or the men who were trying to grab the no, they weren't being gentle. They were trying to grab the ankles of the women disciples on the stage. And Prabhupada was ready to fight them and defend his disciples. So Prabhupada was uh, gentle most of the time, but when it came to a situation where he had to argue or even physically fight, he was ready. Yeah. Uh, and we can be like that too. Generally, the devotees are very gentle. We're peaceful people. We're just trying to preach, just trying to give some knowledge, some education to people. We're just trying to give knowledge. But in a case of verbal attack or even physical attack, we should be ready to defend our spiritual master, defend the other devotees, defend Krishna philosophically. Anyway, that's just a significant point. Okay, I'll read a little farther. Uh, Some of the devotees who had seen the poor attendance at Prabhupada's Boston University lecture feared the same thing might happen at the Harvard School of Divinity. So they suggested Swamiji wait at his apartment while they went ahead to the lecture hall to see how many people would gather. So there were a lot of people there. Prabhupada arriving half an hour later than scheduled, led the audience in kirtan and began his talk. He praised the Harvard students as fortunate, citing that according to Vedic literature, aristocratic birth, good education, beauty, and wealth are the four chief material opulences. Compared to others in the world, he said the students at Harvard had all these opulences. If, however, they could increase their good fortune by adding Krishna consciousness, then that would be their perfection. So, similarly, if these materially fortunate persons could add the spiritual fortune of Krishna consciousness to their life, then that life would be successful. After Prabhupada's talk, Mr. Matthews, who was a professor or almost a professor at Harvard, who was a friend of the devotees in Boston, he was there at the lecture. He thanked uh, Prabhupada for his discourse on Hindu philosophy. But immediately Prabhupada interrupted. Actually, we are not Hindu. And Prabhupada explained the universality of Krishna consciousness. So yeah, Prabhupada describes that many times. I'm sure most of you or all of you were raised in so-called Hindu families, but Hindu is not what we are. That's a name given by the Muslims to people who practice the Sanatan Dharma, Vedic culture. So it's not a word that's found in the Shastras, but it's a word that's come over the years, centuries, to be associated with anyone who does any kind of religious practice. Uh, Coming from India, pretty much. They're a Hindu. So, and sometimes Prabhupada used the term Hindu just for the sake of convenience, especially when he was lecturing to a group in India. But most of the time, he made this point that we're not Hindus, we're Vaishnavas, or we're followers of Sanatan Dharma, we're followers of Vedanta, and Krishna is God, not only for the Hindus, but for the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims and the atheists, and Krishna is God for everyone. Anyway, it's like a side point, but it's not an insignificant point, but it's not one of our basic points of preaching. As the meeting broke up, some interested students came forward for more discussion with Swamiji. One Sanskrit student asked, how can a brahmachari be expected to understand the Gita Govinda, since it deals in so many intricacies of man-woman relationships and love affairs? Srila Prabhupada replied, only a brahmachari can understand Gita Govinda, because it is not about mundane sexuality. It is the highest spiritual technology of Radha and Krishna. And when Prabhupada says only a brahmachari, it's not that only someone in the brahmachari ashram, but all the devotees in Krishna consciousness are renounced, even in married life, where there is allowance for some sense gratification in a restricted way. Still, the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, which we base our whole life on, is a philosophy of renunciation. It's a philosophy of sannyas life or brahmachari life. So, and sometimes Prabhupada called these Grihasta disciples, he would call them brahmachari grihastas, because even in married life in Krishna consciousness, it's still a very renounced, uh, totally Krishna conscious life at its roots and at our very essence is renunciation of material sense gratification. So Prabhupada said only a brahmachari can be expected, can understand the Gita Govinda, because it's not about mundane sexuality. It is the highest spirituality, spiritual technology of Radha and Krishna. And all the girls and boys, all the grihastas, all the children in Krishna consciousness, all the old men, old ladies, all of us in Krishna consciousness are qualified by our sincerity and devotion to understand the loving relationship of Radharani and Krishna. And as time goes on, we'll understand more and more. But yeah. No, I'll just tell you one little thing about Harvard. Harvard is another big, famous college, and people there, very intelligent young men and ladies. The professors, very intelligent, materially speaking. But we had one devotee living here in the early 80s. His name was I can't think of his name. Anyways, he was, he'll probably come to me in a minute, but he was, he was living in the temple here in Boston, but he was going to Harvard Divinity School, um, and he was studying Sanskrit, and he was getting his degree in PhD in like Sanskrit, I think, or Vedic studies or something. I forget, but he was in the Harvard Divinity School. And you could say, oh, the Divinity School, those must be like elevated type people. But he said that he told us that, I'm in the Harvard Divinity School, and they even had one of their PhD topics that some of them were studying was the writings of the six Goswamis of Vrindavan. And but he says, so that's, you might say, oh, that's pretty good. But he said that as soon as the classes were over, their activities were no different from any other typical college kid or college professor in the United States. Just the same intoxication, meat eating, illicit sex, and gambling. But of course, their academic aspirations were nice, but their actual lifestyle is no different from anyone else. It's just another comment on the times that we live in. We're so, the Kali Yuga is no joke. It's a very fallen age. Let's see. Is it time to stop? Is it time?
You can read further a little if you want. Yeah. Yes.
A few more minutes.
Should not be late for you there.
All right, I'll just read a little bit more. Prabhupada was especially pleased about his Harvard lecture. He said, that was a very good meeting last night. Oh, this is a very nice, important point that Satsrup Maharaj makes. It seemed to the devotees accompanying Prabhupada from one speaking engagement to another that they were the real audience, the ones to whom Prabhupada was speaking. It was for them that he had come to Boston, more than for the 200 students who sat in the chapel at Northeastern or in the MIT lounge or at Harvard. Prabhupada was setting the example of how to preach. It was for them, the ones who would have to carry on the mission in his absence. Yeah, so it makes the point that everything Prabhupada did, of course, he was preaching to the students there and the universities and the professors, but the Prabhupada considered his main task was to train the disciples he had. After all, Prabhupada didn't know how long he would be able to stay and guide his disciples. It turned out to be several more years, but he didn't know that. He thought I could leave at any time. He often expressed that. So his main concentration was, of course, in making new disciples, men and women, and they were coming very quickly. But his, we could say, primary concentration was to train the disciples that he had, what they had to do, what they had to learn, how their behavior had to be. As Vaishnavas, how to carry on a spiritual movement, his spiritual movement after he left. So he had to train them. Okay, well, I guess I'll stop there. If anyone wants to say anything, if there's any time left. Otherwise, we can stop. All right.
So, Prabhuji, I wanted to ask this. Uh, Prabhupada visited Boston a couple of times.
Yeah.
This is like the first time Prabhupada visiting Boston. There were programs in the universities, and so was it the same whenever Prabhupada would visit? That okay, there were programs. Prabhupada would visit each university and bless students like that.
Well, not like this time. There were some other programs the next time he came, but not like this first time. It was really well arranged and everything. I'll tell, yeah. I'll tell you a quick story that I read. We might get to it later, but I'll just go over it real quick. It's a little bit later in this book, and it's on the same visit. And one of the devotees, somebody had donated to him, to the temple, a bus. And I don't know what you call it in India, but it's, a bus. I think you know what it is. And uh, anyway, but it was an old broken down bus, bad engine, and there were no seats in it except the driver's seat. It was just an old, not very good bus at all. And they took Prabhupada for a ride in it, and all the devotees were in the bus, and Prabhupada hadn't been there since he arrived at Commonwealth Pier in 1965. He hadn't been in Boston. And the temple that they had was like 4 or 5 miles from where he landed at Commonwealth Pier. But as soon as he got in the bus, he started to direct the driver what turns to make and he got them to Commonwealth Pier. And I don't know how did he do that? He hadn't ever been around Boston in a car before or walking before, and he'd never been anywhere except Commonwealth Pier. But somehow he directed the driver It was a lot of turns, and it's not easy to get there. It's not a simple route. But anyway, it's just a little thing I read the other day, and it just struck me like, how did that happen? But anyway, it did happen. I guess Krishna was just telling Prabhupada, telling him, we take a right, take a left, take a right, take a left. And they got there. And then when they got, the devotees were like really proud of this bus they had. They're like, yeah, because everybody was young and poor then. Almost everybody was, had practically no money, and the temple had practically no money, struggling just to pay the rent and to buy some flour and some beans to make breakfast. So somebody donated a bus. They were like, whoa, they were really proud of it. And they showed Prabhupada, look at our bus, Swamiji. And they took him for a ride. But it wasn't a good bus. And when they got back from this trip to the Commonwealth Pier, Prabhupada said, having a bus is a very good idea, but not this bus. That's a nice little story. All right, I think we better stop now. All glories to Srila.
Thank you so much, Shwari.
Thank you so much.
So let's thank His Grace Muktavandya for blessing us with this wonderful divine association. By love the chanting 3 times. Hari Bol!
Hari
Bol, Hari Bol,
Hari Bol. Thank you so much,
Prabhu
Prabhu.
ki
Jai.
Prabhupada.
Prabhupada ki jai. Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, Hari Bol, Samara Bharti, Satvika Jaya. Thank you so much for joining. Continue chanting. I'm going. Hari Bol. It's Grace Muktavandya Prabhu ki jai.
जय
Jagat Guru Prabhupada की जय. ये करो भला दिन में फिर डिस्कस करेंगे. मोहिनी एकादशी महामहोत्सव की जय. हरि बोल. Thank you so much.